Michael, G.K. Chesterton said that every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is searching for God. This quote jumped out to me in your book. I'm curious for you. Do you recall when you first read or heard that quote, how it spoke to you then and what it means to you now?
I probably heard that quote for the first time in the early 1990s when I was earning my master's degree in pastoral counseling out at Colorado Christian University here in Denver. And as soon as I heard those words, I thought something about that I relate to, because as I was addicted to pornography and going to strip clubs and paying prostitutes, who actually I now call trafficked women rather than just prostitutes, I was searching for something bigger than sex. And I remember many times being in a situation where this was earliest as an unmarried man, and then later was acting out with pornography in other ways as a married man for the first 3 years of my life, or first 3 years of my marriage. I was aware of just wanting to be held and just wanting to be cared for. And the act of sex was something that it wasn't ultimately what I was pursuing. And as I talked with counselors and therapists and did my own training, I really came to understand more deeply that there's an old quote from the great philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas, who said that beneath all of our sinful or unhealthy behaviors, there's a legitimate God-given appetite. And so that appetite in the sexual act and in sexual desire is not simply for an orgasm or for a climax or to have power over a woman, although all those things are there. There's actually a desire for transcendence and for God himself. This is why Eugene Peterson, when he paraphrased the New Testament in 1 Corinthians 6, he said, sex is more than just skin on skin. It's as much spiritual mystery as physical fact. And that's why, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, sex has always been something sacred that is meant to be special and set apart in a certain kind of relationship that is covenanted, that is bonded, so that that experience of the transcendent and that experience of union with God is mirrored and reflected in the human relationship.
Yeah, that's so beautifully articulated. And I know your book, Surfing for God, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you took that quote from GK, Searching for God, with the brothel door, and you brought it to the modern world with the surfing on the internet for, what we have accessible, the internet, streaming pornography, a whole different ballgame. And I want to kind of maybe transition there, because as you speak here, like with sex addiction, strip clubs, like there is that intimacy. There is that human to human interaction. When we're sitting behind the screens, though, that's absent, right? That's voided. So how do you see the internet, pornography specifically, hijacking that statement and just making it a much more difficult world for men to navigate with all these God-given desires that we still have in our heart?
Yeah, well, I think you described the problem, that it creates a intimate experience without intimacy. And that pornography allows us and gives us the illusion of intimacy, but without actual risk with another human being. Because when I'm engaged, whether it's looking in the eyes of my wife, or before I was married, in the eyes of another woman, or whether I'm unclothed in front of that woman, that there's something incredibly vulnerable, which isn't just the lack of clothing, but it's that sense of I'm letting you see the deepest part of me, and I'm bringing the deepest part of me to you. And unfortunately, although understandably, because sexual desires are so powerful and so intense, for most people, sex has just become a transaction and just an act.
Yeah. Now, in today's world, the average age of exposure to the internet, porn is 8 to 11 years old, depending on the different, data that you look at. A lot of the men that we're beginning to come into encounter with through our programs get caught up so young before they even understand what sex really is. Do you think that men that struggle with porn have a sex addiction, or are sometimes they seeking something different? Like, is it always we're seeking this intimacy, or can there be a case with pornography where maybe they're seeking something deeper or different?
There's an old book written many years ago by Dr. Harry Schaumburg, and it was one of the very first Christian books that it had some substance to it beyond just stop doing this or just try to get more accountability. And it was called False Intimacy. So I believe that all addiction, whether it's food addiction or gambling addiction or shopping or working out for that matter, because everything can be an addiction, that it's all a kind of false intimacy. And what I mean by that, Sex addiction or porn addiction is obviously relational because there's another person that you're interacting with or seeing on the screen. But my favorite definition of addiction, and I used to teach addictions at Denver Seminary to graduate counseling students, and on the first day I would have PowerPoint slides of 10 or more different definitions of addiction, and we would explore each of these. And some were really like out there, but they often tried to get a level of precision that's not actually there. But my favorite definition of an addiction is this: an unhealthy, mood-altering relationship with a person, a substance, or a behavior. I'll say that again: an unhealthy, mood-altering relationship with a person, substance, or behavior. So it kind of covers all the bases there. I can be addicted to a relationship. I can be addicted to acting out sexually with people. I can be addicted to food, to drugs, to alcohol. I can be addicted to some behavior that gives me dopamine hits. And again, that's why it could be weightlifting or Bible study for that matter. It could be something good, but it's a relationship. And this is a secular definition, by the way. And I think it's important that the objects of our addiction, they become stand-ins, if you will, for attachment needs that every human being has. So a little boy, when I was little, every infant all the way through adulthood, we have these 4 attachment needs to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. And those 4 S's are just a template for how we get our needs met in the world. And when we're little, that's a one-way street. If we're not poured into, and if our caregiver doesn't give us the sense of seeing us, not just physically, but emotionally, soothing us in our distress, creating an environment that's safe, not just physically, but emotionally. And ultimately, if they don't give us those 3 things, we won't develop a secure attachment. That sense that I can get my needs met reliably and predictably, and that's a good thing. If that doesn't happen, then I've got to learn to take care of myself and to meet my needs on my own. And pornography and sex in particular, par excellence, seem to meet those needs like nothing else. We can also turn to other addictions, but I would argue that all addictions are relational, and that every human being is addicted to something.
I love that. Are you familiar with Dr. Anna Lembke of Stanford, author of Dopamine Nation?
I'm not.
Incredible work. I think you'd really enjoy the book Dopamine Nation. We had Anna on the show about two-ish years ago, and she's been Stanford's like head director of addiction. And I had her define it just in a very similar way that you just did. In her definition, I think it almost runs parallel to what you shared. So hers is an addiction is the continued or repeated use of substance and or behavior. So she's including the behavior in there, despite the negative consequences to self or others. So I think for her, it's the negative consequences. Where yours, it's the unhealthy, mood-altering relationship. Like it's speaking to a lot of the same things. It's a relationship that we have, despite it having a negative effect. And I think that's where it's like you said, working out can be an addiction. Well, for many people, working out is a great thing. There's a benefit. I went to the gym this morning. I go every single day. But when it becomes an idol, when it becomes, it has negative impact on your social life, other areas, then yeah, you're probably tapping into the addiction space, something I saw a lot in the bodybuilding community. So I love that. I love that addiction. And the link to it being relationship, because I also love the quote that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but it's the community and the connection that you build. Is that why community is so crucial in all recovery, whether it's from pornography, alcohol, anything? Is it because the addiction is rooted in that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just pragmatic, like, if we go far back to the 1930s when Alcoholics Anonymous was started, and then all of the groups that have spawned off of that, they didn't just say, oh, well, this is what's helpful. But I think they knew something because the founders of AA were coming from a Christian perspective in their own recovery. They knew something of how we're relational beings and that God himself is relational. I like to say, paraphrase of Genesis 1:1 was in the beginning is relationship. In the beginning was relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they're together. And if we're made in his image, we're relational. And pornography is all about, I can get my needs met apart from relationship. It gives me the illusion of relationship. It allows me to feel like a real man, but it doesn't require me to actually be a real man.